Welcome back to Savannah Spectacles, a series on the history of circus and its allied arts in Savannah. This is Act 2, The Circus Comes to Town, where we'll talk about the sights, sounds, and politics of Circus Day. Before we jump in, though, I just wanted to add a disclaimer that this presentation is not meant to condone the concerns around animal welfare or the exploitation of circus performers, especially those with physical differences, only to situate these displays in their historical context. I may also use historic terminology that we know today to be offensive or harmful, but I'll only use them when describing or quoting an act's promotional material. Let's jump right in and kick it off with a little pop quiz. See if you can guess what future blockbuster star is being reviewed in the following quote. This piece was abominable trash, and the company was the worst that's ever duped a confiding public. The Aboriginal part of the circus was a gigantic fraud, and the Indians, degenerate specimens of the noble savages. It's inadvisable to attempt a repetition of the blood and thunder trash in this community. At the close of the third act, a large number of the audience seemed to have left the theater. Would you have guessed that this was a review for Buffalo Bill's performance? Well, technically I guess it's a review for the Lanier's Dramatic Company featuring Buffalo Bill, but since we only remember one of these names a century and a half later, we will give it to Buffalo Bill. By 1874, Savannah audience was a discriminating one. We had discriminating tastes, and this absolutely abysmal review marks Buffalo Bill's first introduction to the Savannah market. For this hunger for history, I've scoured newspapers, route books, publications, and ad materials in order to present a picture of one of the most important and anticipated days on the calendar for any town, Circus Day, in Savannah. After this review of these materials, I can say that luckily for Cody, the impresario's legal name, who came to Savannah many more times, and most of the other performers that came before and after him, Savannah spectators were rarely so harsh. There's a lot that can and has been said by academics, circus historians, curators, performers, admin, and fans about the inner workings and, most importantly, significance of the circus in American history and culture. Since people far smarter than me have devoted their entire careers to researching the subject, I'll just let this quote from Dr. Janet Davis in her book The Circus Age, Culture and Society Under the Big Top sum it up. The circus reached virtually all Americans. It educated and challenged people irrespective of their ability to read or their distance from the metropolis. Its live visual presence made it a popular forum on science, race thinking, gender ideology, U.S. foreign relations, and national identity. The circus helped to consolidate a shared national leisure culture. At a time before the proliferation of mass media, the circus presented to its audience a global sensory blitz, immediate live images that mirrored the nation's position in the modern world. America has been traversed by hundreds of circus companies, starting with the itinerant shows of John Bill Ricketts in 1793. At the height of the American circus's activity, in 1903, 98 circuses and menageries crisscrossed the country in one single year, the most ever on the road at one time. Most were small regional dog and pony shows, others were global phenomena that are permanently etched in our cultural memory. Over the course of researching this project, in Savannah, I've identified well over 100 performances by at least 45 companies, and I'm confident that really just does not even scratch the surface. Savannians got to experience the first American instance of a circus and menagerie traveling as one company with the David Wright Menagerie and Brown Brothers performance in 1828. They witnessed the first transcontinental rail circus, which was Dan Costello's Circus and Menagerie in 1868 and 1869. And they witnessed the Ringling Brothers' first Southern tour in 1896. In fact, Ringling Brothers shows on their own or after their merger with Barnum and Bailey came no less than 10 times, and Barnum and Bailey, or the combination of both, came at least 6 times before merging with Ringling in name to become Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Combined Shows in 1919. Buffalo Bill came at least 8 times, even after his shameful first showing, and the 20th century phenom Clyde Beatty came at least 5 times. Route books for the various shows regularly remarked upon how strong the support for the circus was here in town. This 1901 entry from the John Robinson Circus said that the Savannah stop was the banner business of the season, thanks in part to it being the hometown of their famous clown, John Lolo. The John B. Doerr's Inner Ocean Show came to town in 1886. If their route book is to be believed, the population of Savannah was around 32,000, and they claimed to have sold 10,000 tickets, meaning roughly one-third of the population came out to see the show. And they weren't even the highest-selling attraction in town that week. By the turn of the century, circuses were reporting numbers upwards of 18,000 spectators. Savannah was officially a show town. With all the support for circus in Savannah, it seemed fitting to walk us through Circus Day, or what historian Stuart Thayer called the circus's rituals of itinerancy. See, before the 1920s in America, one did not simply show up at the big top, watch the show, and then head home. No, you participated in Circus Day, an all-day affair that filled most host cities with provocative and awe-inspiring sights, sounds, sometimes smells, and maybe, most importantly, ample opportunities to spend money. Attending the circus was an experience with a capital E. Though the details changed from show to show, the routines of a circus performance remained the same for decades. So, let's take our journey through the rituals of Circus Day. I also do want to note here that I don't have a lot of visual materials directly showing Savannah other than newspapers, but I made an attempt to use visuals in this presentation from circuses in the years that they came to town or of acts that Savannians would have witnessed. When spectators lined the streets and flooded the midway on Circus Day, the whimsical spectacle in front of them belied the complex planning and coordination that went into pulling each stop off with a perception of ease. Circus routes were planned at the start of each season and were the result of a detailed analysis of weather conditions, crop reports, harvest seasons, factory cycles, competitor performances, and income levels, with the goal of producing maximum profit with minimal external interference. As a result, most circuses stopped in Savannah in the fall, with October and November being our busiest season. As you can see in these just snippets of schedules, mega shows would come to town basically back to back, and I really just can only imagine the complete sensory overload that residents would have experienced in those months. Circus Day actually started weeks to months in advance of a show rolling into town. Advancemen, as the teams of advertisers, bill posters, logistics officers, and what you otherwise might call fixers, traveled the country ahead of their shows. They were busy booking circus lots, contracting with local vendors for critical supplies, and more. They worked out arrangements with local rail companies, and advancemen were responsible for securing any legal paperwork like licenses or permits necessary to conduct business in a town. In Savannah, local laws dictated that, quote, "No person shall exhibit in public any tragedy, comedy, farce, interlude, pantomime, rope or wire dancing or walking, feats of horsemanship, waxworks, curious animals, music, or other public shows without permission obtained from the mayor," unquote. This law was first passed in 1799, and it was amended periodically to include things like the parades. It remained relatively the same throughout its history. What did change significantly, though, were the license fees required in order to be granted this permission. In 1857, the fee was not to exceed $104.44. In 1869, performances at the Savannah Theater were taxed $150. In 1880, parades were added to the list of amusements that needed to be permitted, and in 1887, large shows were charged $200 per performance, and small shows paid $100 a week. By 1910, those fees jumped up to $1,000 a day. In the 1950s, ordinances were added that required transient shows to have their electrical work inspected and mandated that a dedicated fire watcher be on duty. These changes likely had something to do with the deadly 1944 Hartford Circus fire, which killed 167 people and injured 700 more. Admin were of utmost importance to the success of a show. They incentivized property owners to allow bill posters to literally plaster the facades with flashy posters that advertised the wonders that were coming soon, and they placed strategic ads in the newspaper to entice and evoke the curiosity of their potential audiences. One of the best-known advanced men in the business was Charles Bernard, a Savannian who was employed by several shows as a press agent, including the Walter L. Main Circus from 1894 to 1924. As we can see in this tribute to him, not only did Bernard help sell the circus to various audiences, he also helped sell Savannah. Shows that he worked on frequently advertised the pleasures of local hotels and cafes. A lot of the research for this project was done using local newspapers, and I've amassed a lot of examples of the ads traveling shows placed in Savannah area papers. Overall, the newspaper ads demonstrate an evolution in complexity and literal size, from taking up only a few lines of text with fairly basic pictures to full-page spreads. Regardless of the era, though, advertisers have always used witty and descriptive language, and these newspaper spots reveal a lot about what audiences were interested in and what the shows thought could bring them into their audience. Some circuses resorted to sneaky and maybe even borderline underhanded advertising techniques. For example, in October of 1886, P.T. Barnum's Barnum in London show was scheduled to play Savannah on October 15th, and the John B. Dorris Inter-Ocean Circus was coming 3 days later on October 18th. As Barnum was ramping up his advertisements in the Savannah Morning News, this little article pops up, purporting to be a charitable offer from the manager of the Dorris show to donate $10,000 to the charity of choice for anybody that could prove that Barnum was falsely advertising his venture. Dorris accuses Barnum of lying about bringing his Congress of Giants and Arabian Circus, only having 3 clowns instead of 20, and worst of all, only bringing 12 elephants to the South instead of 25. This move apparently positions Dorris as generous, but also undermines Barnum's integrity. Looking at their programs, in 1886, Barnum featured no less than 54 acts performing in 3 rings. John Dorris, on the other hand, had only 22 acts performing in 2 rings. He had to do something to try and lure his audience under his big top. Didn't quite work, though. Dorris's show reports selling around 10,000 tickets, and the Savannah Morning News reports that Barnum sold over 20,000 tickets. For some reason, though, Dorris's route book still gloats that the show, quote, played to bigger business than Barnum 3 days before, unquote. With all these fine details worked out and the audience is sufficiently abuzz about the upcoming circus performance, it was finally time for Circus Day. The excitement started at the crack of dawn, when the circus, be it by wagon, truck, or train, would arrive and begin unloading its precious cargo. Throngs of people flooded town from near and far. Special trains offered discounted fares and brought rural residents and circus goers in from up to 50 miles away. Schools, businesses, and factories regularly shut down operations on Circus Day. As part of this research, I've tried to identify the locations of circus lots in Savannah throughout time. Early shows tended to congregate around City Market and the nearby vicinity, as is the case of the J.E.M. Hobby United Circus and Menagerie, which played at the corner of West Broad and Bryan Streets in 1839, and in 1859, an appearance of Orton, an older circus, occurred on West Broad Street at Zubley. The 1834 Butler, Banker and Company show advertised their performance on Broughton Street, which, after comparing it with some of these that say the head of Broughton Street or the west end of Broughton Street, I believe this to be the West Broad and Broughton Street intersection, so in the same vicinity again. By the 1860s and 1870s, circus played in the vicinity of Troop Square, including the Dan Costello Circus, the Stone and Murray Circuses in 1868, and the Colonel C.T. Ames Great New Orleans Menagerie and Circus that performed on October 10, 1870. By 1871, the new lot moved to Liberty Street at the intersection of Habersham, where John Robinson, Stone and Murray, and Dan Rice pitched their tents. In 1880, John Robinson's shows performed on Whitaker Street opposite the park, which is presumably Forsyth Park. By the last decades of the 19th century, circus performances seem to have consolidated in one of 2 lots. The W.W. Cole Colossal Show in 1885, John B. Dorris and P.T. Barnum's Rival shows in 1886, the 1890 Barnum and Bailey Show, and the King and Franklin Circus, as well as the Adam Forepaugh Show in 1892, described their locations variably from the vague exhibition grounds south of Anderson or 2nd Avenue grounds to the specific circus grounds on Whitaker south of the city and suburban railway depot. Okay, that gives me something to work with. With these descriptors, I was able to triangulate that the shows erected their big tubs somewhere in this vicinity. This location is perfect. It's immediately adjacent to a contemporary streetcar rail stop for easily transporting crowds. It's still pretty near the urban center, and there's an adequate amount of space. Starting in the late 19th century, circuses required around 10 acres for their grounds. The other popular destination for circus grounds was the Bolton Street Baseball Park, or the showgrounds on Bolton and East Broad Street. Though there was also a baseball park a little further east a few years later, I believe these descriptors refer to the Bolton Street Park, which was erected around 1885. It was bounded by Bolton Street and Park Avenue, east of the East Broad Railroad tracks. Again, this location has easy access to rail lines, wide open space, and proximity to the downtown business district. Barnum & Bailey in 1894, Ringling Brothers in 1896, John Robinson in 1901 and 1904, and the Forepaugh Sells Brothers Show in 1902, among others, played here. Remember that panned review of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show that I started this presentation with? Yeah, that performance happened in the Savannah Theater, the historic Savannah Theater on Chippewa Square. I do have a hard time imagining a gun-slinging, tomahawk-swinging melodrama surrounding you in that space, but Cody played the Savannah Theater at least 4 times. After he became a blockbuster success and his show evolved from a melodrama to circus, he presented his Congress of Rough Riders at the Bolton Street Baseball Park. Later in the 20th century, smaller shows and Shriner circuses played at both Grayson Stadium and the Thunderbolt Amusement Park, and shows like the Ringling Brothers, Barnum & Bailey played at the Civic Center into the 21st century. One of the highlights of Circus Day was the parade. What started as a logistical necessity to move performers, animals, and equipment through the towns to the circus lot quickly grew into the phenomenon of the circus parade. Parades became increasingly elaborate, ornate, exciting, and tantalizing until they erupted into full-blown pageants around 1900. The circus parade was another carefully calculated move by circus owners. The legions of costumed musicians, performers, and exotic animals intermixed with elaborate wagons and cages served as a little taste of what was to come and a free little bit of last-minute advertising to drum up excitement for the crowds that lined the streets to watch it go by. Parade advertisements harped on the length and number of performers, wagons, cages, and wild animals on the parade, and the elaborate costuming. Nothing like it has ever been seen before, with a common refrain. It should be noted that not everything was given away for free in the parade, though. Sideshow performers rarely paraded. Audiences would just have to cough up the entrance fee to satisfy their curiosity about these individuals. The 1886 Barnum in London show parade was supposed to feature 16 open dens of wild animals, a herd of elephants, wild animals on a leash, camels and elephants harnessed to chariots, a dozen kinds of music, and myriad rare features. The show that year included the first ever Ethnological Congress and Jumbo the Elephant's articulated skeleton, a Congress of Giants, and more. Unfortunately, though, it did not quite live up to its hype. The parade was delayed, and then, quote, a good part of what is ordinarily seen had to be left out, purportedly because the telegraph and telephone lines overhead in town were too low. The parade left from the 2nd Street lot, wove north along Drayton Street, around Bull and Bay to West Broad Street, then back to the circus grounds via Whitaker and Drayton. John Robinson was renowned for his elaborate parades, so much so that the parade lineup was published in the newspaper all on its own. The 1904 show set up on the Bolton Street lot, headed to the south end of Forsyth Park, then to West Broad Street, around Liberty, up Drayton, and around City Market, then back to the show via Drayton Street. The parade included 40 wagons drawn by either 5, 6, or 8 horse teams. 24 horses carried the calliope, which is the circus's signature music-making wagon. It had acrobatic bicyclists, a children's menagerie, open cages containing pelicans, which was drawn by camels, a den wagon of Russian wild bears, polar bears, an aquatic tank of, quote, educated sea lions, end quote, a grand allegorical procession representing the Durbar of Delhi, an eccentric clown band, water buffalo, a lion, a tiger, Wild West display, a Turkish gymnasium cage, and on and on and on. This photo shows a segment of the 1905 Ringling Brothers Parade through Thomasville, Georgia. Though this is Thomasville, the parade would have been very similar to one experienced by Savannians a few days before on November 13th. Ringling played Thomasville on 17th. The 1902 Four Paw Sells Brothers Circus and Parade ran into a bit of trouble when the police prohibited the parade from stepping off because of confusion about the show's $250 permit fee. Neither legal trouble nor pouring rain discouraged crowds, though, who reportedly still gathered around to watch the parade go by. When Barnum and Bailey came to Savannah in 1909, Billboard magazine reports that the street show was so immense that it actually damaged the pavement on the streets. The city marshal served a warrant to the managers of the show, who promptly put up the bond in the form of their largest elephant. The elephant wore the tag from the marshal's warrant and the remainder of their time in town. Until the 19-teens, towns and businesses tended to love the circus. Circus Day included an influx of people who were just primed to spend money, not just on the show, but throughout the day, in order to make it an occasion. Trains would bring people into town starting early in the morning, and they would send them home after the evening performance. They came from rural areas, where maybe dress shops or chocolatiers were a rarity. While you're in town for the show, maybe you take your family out to lunch, you indulge in a sweet treat, or you buy a new hat. After Barnum and Bailey's 1894 appearance, the Savannah Morning News wrote, quote, "While the circus took a good deal of money out of the city, it brought a good deal here and a good many people who spent it." Savannah's Retail Merchants Association celebrated that the circus brought rural people who, quote, "had money to spend and spent it." After the turn of the century, though, the tides did begin to change. The rise of the automobile signaled the decline of the circus parade. Now, audiences could drive themselves to town, directly to the circus lot, watch the show, and then be on their way home, no longer spreading their discretionary funds around. The Retail Merchants Association petitioned Savannah City Council in 1901 to raise the license fees and prohibit circus performances on Saturdays. They did raise the license fees, but they did not ban Saturday performances, as these organizations, quote, "take away considerable amounts of money that otherwise would be circulating among merchants of the city." After the fee was raised to $1,000, Savannah saw a significant decline in the number of shows that appeared in town. Only the most elaborate could afford to pay out that amount of money. Complaints about traffic proliferated, and towns took issue with the heavy wagons and elephants damaging their freshly paved roads, as we can see with the warrant served to the Barnum and Bailey show in 1909. No longer was circus the economic boom that it once was. While performers were trooping through town, the well-oiled machine of hundreds of workers were getting to work raising a canvas city from an empty lot. A lot has been written about the marvel of the efficiency that was circus operations starting in the late 1800s. But suffice it to say, the circus lot team members, be they canvasmen, riggers, chandelier men, or any of the other countless jobs, worked much in the way that people on an assembly line did, in tandem, each with a hyper-specific duty that allowed the backlot to come to life in a matter of hours. Barnum and Bailey's 1894 tour, which came to Savannah on October 10th, included a big top that measured 440 feet by 180 feet, a menagerie tent that was 360 feet long by 160 feet wide, a dressing room tent, 2 horse tents, multiple wardrobe tents, a sideshow tent, sideshow dressing room tent, a mobile blacksmith shop, a repair shop, a cook wagon, and on and on and on. 12 tents in total. The team could have the lot mapped and staked out in under half an hour. The Big Top Gang, with its 85 members, hammered poles into the ground and raised the Big Top canvas in under 45 minutes. All in all, the 1894 Barnum and Bailey Circus, with its 12 tents, took under 2.5 hours to assemble. So now it's time for the main attraction. Though it's impossible to do them all justice, here are just a few of the awe-inspiring, death-defying, wild, and wonderful acts and performances Savannians had the opportunity to witness over the years. I'll note that since Act 1 focused on animals in Savannah, this is already long enough. I am leaving out equestrian and wild animal acts here and concentrating instead on human feats. Circus arts have their roots in the theatrical performances, and so as the circus grew of teams of just a few performers to literally legions of them, the melodramas evolved into pageants, which then developed into the spectacle, or the spec in circus lingo. Specs were elaborate theme productions in the form of a grand procession around the ring, akin to the street parade, but usually only available under the big top. They usually evoked exaggerated historical, religious, or especially exotic international themes under the guise of being educational. A spec was more of a showcase than a theatrical drama, though. Specs that wowed Savannah audiences included the 1890 Barnum spectacle Nero, or the Destruction of Rome, which advertised 1,200 performers in a dramatic and sumptuous costumes. Forepaugh's Fall of Nineveh spectacle claimed to be a terrific battle scene and included 1,000 actors and $150,000 worth of costumes, which is something that they readily advertised. Not all spectacles were so dense and historical, though. The 1946 Ringling spectacle was Toyland and included clever costuming like these whimsical showgirls that we can see here. Giants, Lilliputians, snake charmers, dog-faced boys, the what is it man, wild men of Borneo, Savannians saw them all under the sideshow and curiosity tents. Today we recognize the concept of the sideshow to be pretty appalling, but in the 19th and 20th century it held a pretty powerful sway over the public, and many of the performers were celebrities in their own right and were highly sought after. I think maybe my favorite anecdote that's emerged while working on this project is of the, quote, midget wedding, unquote, that took place in Forsyth Park in 1926. On April 8, 1926, Ike Mattina, one half of the purported shortest twins on Earth, married Mrs. Ike, also known as Marguerite Nicoloy or Princess Marguerite, in a ceremony in Forsyth Park, with a mere 10,000 guests. Mayor Robert Hull, seen here, was the officiant, and the ceremony was performed on the bandstand surrounded by beautiful floral setting arranged by Albert Olschig. His name was included in the newspaper as well. The reception was at the Geiger Hotel, as well as the couple's wedding night suite, which was outfitted with miniature furniture for the occasion. The couple was in town while performing with the Zydeman and Polly show. The twins and Princess Marguerite performed with several shows before joining Zydeman, and most notably, after their sideshow career, they went to Hollywood and starred as Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz. It's even rumored that Mike and Ike were the models for 2 of the animated dwarves in the Snow White cartoon. They are not, though, the inspiration for the candy Mike and Ike's, because if you Google them, this is the most commonly Googled question, so for reference. One of the most famous moments in sideshow history was the wedding of P.T. Barnum, P.T. Barnum's performer Tom Thumb, to Lavinia Warren in 1863, and some of the advertising for the Mattina wedding alluded to Tom Thumb. So I had my doubts as to whether this was actually like a legit wedding or just a publicity stunt, but according to the newspapers, the couple did in fact apply for a marriage license in the Chatham County courts under their legal names. Unfortunately, it was not meant to last, though, and the couple divorced a year and a half later, with Ike accusing Marguerite of cruel and barbarous treatment and desertion. The Mattina brothers' biographical pamphlet tells a different story, though. Since a wife was not something he could share with his twins, Mike and Ike vowed to stay single until they both could marry. Never missing a chance to capitalize on a superlative, though, the pamphlet claims that Ike is the smallest person in the world to be married and divorced. What is a circus without a clown? In January of 1872, Dan Rice's Paris Pavilion Company exhibited at the Liberty Street lot. Dan Rice is possibly the most famous clown that you've never heard of. His acts blended humor, political satire, physical feats of horsemanship, and songs, all of which made him a household name in the 19th century. He notoriously performed in blackface before the Civil War and is credited with linking minstrelsy with the circus. He was so popular, he even staged a failed campaign for presidency in 1868. For clowns that you have heard of, though, both Emmett Kelly and Lou Jacobs were touring with the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey show in 1946, which also happens to be the year that Lou Jacobs debuted for the first time ever a clown car act. A quintessential part of the circus experience is holding your breath while a daredevil does a death-defying stunt. Lulu, the only flying man in the world, visited Savannah in 1881 with the W.C. Coupe New United Monster shows. From this poster, would you guess that Lulu was arguably maybe the first or second ever human cannonball act? Lulu was the adopted son of circus proprietor and inventor Farini, and thus also his guinea pig. Lulu's fanciful flight, described in the Savannah Morning News as 100 feet through the air, performing 2 complete evolutions before landing in a net, was powered by an iron catapult. Early on, when he was performing this act, the catapult was hidden under scaffolding to create the illusion that he was self-propelled. Then later, after Farini's other protege, Zazelle, performed the act openly, very successfully, Lulu also openly displayed his catapult. Diavolo, who performed with the Forepaugh and Sells Brothers combined shows in their October 26, 1902 Savannah performance, was the master of suspense in his day. His act, called Looping the Loop, involved riding a bicycle down a steep incline in order to fly around a vertical loop and back to safety. In 1906, Barnum and Bailey brought Isabel Butler and her Dip of Death act, where she rode a vehicle around a loop contraption before launching into the air. Defying all characterization, Hilary Long placed skates on his head and his hat on his feet while bouncing down a flight of stairs with the Ringling Brothers shows during their 1918 season. Aerialists, of course, are some of the most recognizable circus acts and performers. Lena Jordan of the Flying Jordan Troupe is the first athlete to ever complete a triple somersault on the trapeze. She debuted the trick in 1897, and it was her signature move by the time she visited Savannah with the 1904 Forepaugh Sells show. Lillian Lietzel, who was with Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey shows for many years, visited Savannah at least once in 1919. She was arguably the biggest star of her day, just a complete A-list celebrity for the time. Her specialty was the Roman rings, and her most famous trick was her one-armed planche, where she would throw her body like a vertical propeller, dislocating her shoulder with each drop. She did this over and over and over. Her record was 149 consecutive loops. After audiences were sufficiently enthralled and the sugar rush of the circus goodies wore off, it was time for the show to move on again. The 1894 Barnum and Bailey Big Top that I mentioned earlier took just 31 minutes to disassemble. The rest of the lot came down just as fast, and in no time, the show was loaded up and back on the road, or rails, on its way to repeat the whole process the next day in a brand new town. So thank you for journeying with me through Circus Day, and I will leave you with the traditional circus sign-off. May all your days be circus days. Thanks.